Good morning, Year 9. Hope you're feeling okay today. Welcome to Lesson 6 in our Romantic Poetry series of lessons. Today we're looking at a poem called Neutral Tones by Thomas Hardy, and this one is another one of the poems that is in the Year 10 and 11 anthology for GCSE. So this one is one of the poems that could appear in your Year 11 exams. The objectives today. First of all, we're going to understand the background to a poem, so find out a bit about the writer and a bit about the context. We're going to read an amazingly depressing poem. We're going to show understanding of poetic language, and we're going to show understanding of poetic structure. Now, these objectives might seem familiar, might feel like we're going over the same content, or sorry, the same skills, and that's absolutely fine. We are just trying to build up your experience of understanding how poems kind of come about, reading a range of poetry. So you've got quite a deep and thorough kind of collection to fall back on. It's always useful and it's an essential skill to be able to analyze language and show understanding of language, and the same with structure. So in both, in terms of all four of these are all very, very useful skills to have in Year 9 and in Year 10 and in Year 11. Okay, so we will be going over them time and time again. The challenge is obviously each time we will use these with a different poem. Eventually, we'll get to a point where we'll feel that we need to put an assessment in, and that assessment will allow you to demonstrate your skills, your ability to analyze poetry, to talk about the context, and to analyze the language and the structure. Okay, so it's all going to build up nicely. Right, so background to this poem. We're looking at a Thomas Hardy poem today, and those are his dates there. Thomas Hardy, 1840 to 1928. He was a Victorian novelist, but obviously he lived into or through the end of the Victorian period. He lived into the 1920s, so he goes past Victorian, but he's typically known as a Victorian novelist who wrote some very depressing and melancholy stories about harsh realities of life in rural England. So that's what kind of made him famous as a writer. These really bleak stories where basically, rather than having a happy ever after type ending, it was a kind of really bad things have happened. Let's just try and deal with it and cope as best we can type endings. Um, Due to his kind of content, he received some harsh criticism about his novels. Um, they had quite a lot of violence in them. They were had lots of kind of like antisocial kind of behaviour. They often had stories where the social norms of the time, like for example, marriage, didn't quite happen in the conventional way. So he was criticised because he was kind of showing stories which for him were real, uh, but from the critic's point of view were kind of against some of the rules that society found important at the time. And because of that criticism, it made him want to stop writing long stories. However, he did continue to write short stories, plays, and poems until his death. And in fact, on his deathbed, he wrote his final poem just a few hours before he died. He dictated it, so he spoke it out loud, and his wife wrote it down shortly before his death. He was married twice, and that's important. His kind of relationships is important. When we read this poem today, it is about relationships. A particular one it may be his, it may be inspired by his, it may be imaginary, but to me it feels very real. So I think there is a definite kind of autobiographical element to the poem we're going to read today. His first marriage was in 1874, was very unhappy. Him and his wife became estranged. Estranged is where it's a bit like it's where separation. So they kind of basically ended their relationship, but they didn't get divorced. They were still married, but they were no longer like living like a married couple. After his wife died in 1912, Hardy revisited the places where they'd fallen in love with each other. And then in 1914, he married his secretary. Um, After his first wife died, he wrote loads of poetry about her and about their relationship. Um, but the poem we're reading today was written while his wife was still alive. So during this unhappy period of his life. So here's the poem. Okay. So if you listen carefully, read it through with me, and I'll just go through it now with you. We stood by a pond that winter day, and the sun was white as though chidden of God, and a few leaves lay on the starving sod. They had fallen from an ash and were grey. Your eyes on me were as eyes that rove over tedious riddles of years ago, and some words played between us to and fro, on which lost the more by our love. The smile on your mouth was the deadest thing, alive enough to have strength to die, and a grin of bitterness swept thereby like an ominous bird a wing. Since then, keen lessons that love deceives and rings with wrong have shaped to me your face and the God-cursed sun and a tree and a pond edged with greyish leaves. So hopefully that poem has made you think a little bit about relationships and in particular the end of a relationship. We're going to go through it slower now, but with some closer detailed analysis and some questions for you to answer. So let's just look at the first line. We have some interesting words here that have got quite a lot of meaning beyond and deeper than the literal sense. So stood, pond, and a winter day. Now, the question I'm asking you here for number one is what makes the image in the first line a perfect representation of the relationship? So I want you to think about these three words: pond, stood, pond, and winter. If you think about the verb stood, what kind of movement is that word suggesting? Second, the word pond. What type of water is this? It makes a pond. Okay, what's the difference between a pond and a lake or a pond and a river? You know, if you're not sure, look at the word pond on a dictionary and see what the definition of pond is. And finally, winter. What's typical in our imagination of a winter day? What are the typical ingredients in terms of like weather and temperature? So you put all that together, you know, the movement, what this suggests about water, and what this suggests about temperature. Cram all that together, and you're getting a perfect representation of the relationship. So basically, what do those three ideas tell us in a kind of image way, like a metaphorical way, about this relationship? Okay, have a think about that question, pause the video, and then we'll move on to question two when you're ready. Okay, question two. Explain how other elements of the setting are symbolic of the relationship. So, what are the other elements? Well, we've got the sun was white, we've got a few leaves laying, we've got starving sod, that just means the kind of unnutritious ground, so you won't be able to grow much in this soil. And we've got an ash tree, and the leaves are grey. So the leaves are mentioned twice. So again, you know, this sun, it's white. If you've ever been out on a winter day, like a couple of days ago, it was really snowy. You might have been lucky to get a clear sky as well. You got bright sunshine. What is it though about the sun in that kind of environment on a winter day? What does the sun provide, and what does the sun lack in that situation? Dead leaves, starving ground. What's that suggest about the relationship? And an ash. Of all the trees that these leaves could have fallen from, Thomas Hardy has given the ash tree the prominence here. So think about the word ash and the kind of the various meanings, not just tree, but the other meanings of the word ash, and how all those little bits in blue could be symbolic of the relationship. Pause the video here, write your answer to question two, and when you're ready, move on. Right, question three. What is the narrator's lover doing in lines 5 and 6? So here's line 5, and here's line 6. And first of all, let's look at the eyes. What are her eyes doing? Well, they are roving. Okay, so You need to look that up in a dictionary or have a very sensible guess. What does rove if you are a rover, like a Range Rover? What do Range Rovers do, or a Land Rover? What can they do? They can move around, and um, they can constantly can survive. They can get across difficult terrain. And then tedious riddles of years ago. Tedious is a nice word that means boring, and a riddle is a kind of a puzzle that's kind of a bit tricky to work out. So, what is she doing? What is the lover doing? Well, her eyes are doing a roving, um, and they are they are looking at this riddle of years ago. So, what is this puzzle from years ago? What could this puzzle be? What is the question that she's trying to work out the answer to? Remember, this is a breakup poem, so you might want to think, how does that fit in with this concept here? What is this puzzle that she can't work out? Question. Pause the video there while you answer question 3, and then move on to question 4. Question 4. What does the word played suggest about their conversation? So, play between us. Okay. Again, it's not the word argued. It's not the word shouted. It's not the word screamed. It's not the word passed. Think about this word played. What does that suggest about their conversation? Okay. And finally, what are they talking about? So, question 5. They are talking about this. Which lost them all by our love? So, what are they discussing? Which lost them all by our love? Okay, pause here, answer the questions, and then we'll move on when you're ready. Right, number 6. How does the tone change in the third stanza? So, um, this is the whole of the third stanza here. And tone is always a tricky question to answer. It's always a difficult thing to focus on. But I think when you look at words like deadest thing and die and bitterness, those words kind of give this stanza a definite shift in tone. Remember, in the previous stanza, they were playing, their conversation had the word played in it, but now we've got these words, deadest, die, and bitterness. So what's happening to the tone in this third stanza? Pause the video while you answer the question, and then press play when you're ready. And then 7, what is an ominous bird a wing, and what does it suggest about their relationship? So it's a simile, like an ominous bird a wing, and ominous means kind of threatening or impending doom. So this bird is a kind of warning of danger and of doom, and it means it's flying. A wing means it's flying. So you might think, well, what types of birds have got that kind of meaning? You know, if you saw one of these, if you saw an ominous bird a wing flying, what type of bird would it be? Would it be would it be a pigeon? Probably not a pigeon. Probably not a blackbird. Something else. So trying to think about what kind of bird it might be, and what does it suggest about the relationship if this sense of doom has just swept uh, across her face as she smiled. Okay, so have a think about what that might mean. Pause the video here, and when you're ready, move on. Okay, last 3 questions, year 9. Number 8. What has this bad relationship taught the narrator? So here's a word that means taught. It means lessons or keen lessons. So what has the voice, the speaker, the narrator of this poem learned about love from this relationship? The poem, as you may have noticed, has, question 9 points out, has an ABBA pattern. Okay, so in this one we've got deceives, which is A, me, tree, B, and B, and then leaves is your A again. So have a look at this pattern. You know what, and again, there's an answer I'm looking for, but that doesn't mean it's the only answer. You might have your own personal opinion, but how does the ABBA pattern symbolize the couple relationship? It's a tricky question. It's a really hard question. So don't worry if you find this one hard. Pause the video, have a think about it. If you want to leave this one blank, come back to it later. That's absolutely fine. Right, question 10. I'll just disappear for a moment. Question 10. What is the effect of repeating some of the ideas in stanza 1 at the end of the poem? So, stanza 1 had the sun, it had a tree, it had a pond, and it had the grey leaves. So, we end the poem with a repetition of some of the ideas from the first stanza, in the kind of some of the first line, really. Think about what the effect is. What's the effect of beginning and ending with the same ideas? What's that suggest about this poem? If it starts and ends, or goes back to the beginning when it gets to the end of the poem, what's that suggest about this relationship, or about how the speaker feels? Right then, pause the video here. Have a think about your answers, write your answers down, and then obviously upload them onto Google Classroom. Right. So hopefully Year 9 you found this lesson useful. As always, any problems, just send me an email or a comment or a comment on Google Classroom, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Have a good day, take care, and I look forward to seeing what you think about this poem. See you later.